Alright, so I've been into Resident Evil for quite some time, around the beginning actually, though not quite. I got to play the original when I borrowed it from a friend around the time Resident Evil 2 came out. I played through that one, and then I was able to borrow Resident Evil 2 and play through that, and then Survivor as well, of all things. I didn't get to play 3 at the time, though I was able to play a demo of it. But after that, I kind of went dormant on the series for a bit until it was around the time Remake and Zero were out. Because parents were ridiculously anal about M-rated games back then. And, again, when I hit 14, I walked over, at least I think I was 14, I went to a Blockbuster of all things that was practically across the street. Well, not quite across the street, it was probably like a block down. I went in there, saw a used copy of Resident Evil Remake. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I missed this series. I don't give a shit what they think. And I bought it. Played through that, although I had to be a bit sly about it. I really ended up liking the remake, but then it ended up also making me miss the original. So the next time I went to a game shop, I picked up the original Resident Evil, the GameCube ports of Resident Evil 2 and 3. I picked up Survivor for like 10 or 15 bucks. And went from there. I played through those. About probably a month later, I picked up Zero. And then I picked up Code Veronica X when the GameCube port finally came out. And from there, I was pretty much like getting all these games, like, not all of them day one, but close to. Like, I picked up 4 like the day it came out. But anyways, back to the starting point. I love the original Resident Evil, as I've pretty much stated. It's had it drew me in with its unique game. For at the time it was unique gameplay, and I didn't really know anything about Alone in the Dark. But Alone in the Dark is, despite giving Capcom ideas, it pales in comparison to Resident Evil. But yeah, I loved the pre-rendered backgrounds at the time. I liked the story, despite the fact that the original was very much B-movie level writing and acting, but that kind of gave it its charm in its own way. Playing it the first time, it actually was scary, although I don't scare it easy. Like, I'm not saying this to be a vanity man, I'm saying this because, like, I've always been the type to be like, okay, it's just a game, so apart from, like, jump scare startles, it's kind of hard for me to get scared. But playing this for the first time, I was younger, and I also didn't know what the fuck was going on. Why there were zombies and shit, and fucking giant spiders of all things in this house. So, that stuck with me. And plus, it's got had a really good score for it, musical score for its time. I thought the tank controls were actually fun. Gave it a bit more of a unique feel to the combat, and the clunkiness did have to make you think whether or not, between that and the limited resources, it did have to make you think whether or not engaging every enemy was a good idea. Though, unless I'm playing like Remake on hard mode or something, my rule is to kill if it lives, it dies. So if you're careful with your ammo, you can kill everything. But you also have to be careful with your health, because that's also pretty limited. But I've played through those games enough times, like, I know where shit is, so I can get away with killing pretty much everything. But yeah, the atmosphere was absolutely perfect for its time as well, both between the score, the pre-rendered visuals, and just the fact that, creepy mansion, classic horror setting. So this I will say objectively it has been outdone, but the original is still my favorite, and it's going top of S tier. Nothing really came close, just giving me that just that experience I got playing it for the first time. So I will admit I'm a bit nostalgia blind for it. Because again, I will also admit it has been outdone, but to me it's still my favorite one to go back to. Resident Evil 2, on the other hand, It did improve upon the original in some ways. It looked better. The acting was a bit better. The story was probably about as hammy, actually. I don't like the fact that, like, if it spoiled anyone who hadn't played the original to being like, oh, it was a virus all along. Which to me, when you give it that human element of it being a man-made weapon instead of something you don't know what the hell is going on, it kind of loses some of the appeal. And if you hadn't played one, it spoils it right out of the gate by stating that in the intro. I didn't like that. I mean, granted, I kind of knew since I had played the original, I knew what was going on, but like that still kind of bugged me. I do think this game is a little bit overrated despite its improvements. Like, sure, it's got more weapons, there's probably more things to kill, there's a better variety of enemies. I think half the reason it is because people just jizz over Leon for whatever reason. I will never understand. Like, sure, he's a better character than Chris. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, there are better characters if you ask me. I'd rather play as Jill, to be honest. Anyways, despite me saying that, again, it did improve upon it in many ways, and it's still an excellent game. So, S tier, but not the top of it. 3, on the other hand, took what 2 did right in its changes and amplified it, in adding something that at the time was pretty unique. It did take away from the fact that, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, of course, 2, I like the fact that there were essentially 4 unique playthroughs, but I don't think they were really unique enough to do like A, B on both sides. But it was a lot better than what the remake did for that, so I just need to get that out there. 3, I will say, does take a bit of a step back by making it one character, but that one character's playthrough is longer than any individual single character scenarios in the 2 previous games. I also will say it did have the best minigame out on, because Resident Evil 1 didn't even have one, and 2's Fourth Survivor was interesting once to see like how the virus got extracted, but it's not really good to go back to, and the second minigame it's unlocked just sucks. But the Mercenaries mode was pretty replayable, and even though it was inferior to like what 4 did, it did set the groundwork for that. But going back to the main game, I think this game's story was more interesting than 2's was. I like the fact that you briefly do get to revisit the RPD, which is easily the best part of 2, even if it is briefly. I don't think there's really any major down point in the game, because, you know, Resident Evil 1 has that part in the underground, but thankfully that's pretty short. And 2 has the sewers, which unfortunately it's about as crappy as the underground, but it lasts even longer. 3, I don't really feel has one, apart from when you have to backtrack to backtrack with that fire hose to like very early on in the game in one of the alleyways. That's really the only like part where I will say it like kind of drags. So I think the pacing in 3 was better. Also, Nemesis himself, just the fact that you have this new stalker type enemy, which, yeah, I know 2 had Mr. X, or we'll be referring to as the Fat Man from now on. But he's slow, and he only appears in the B story. And there's not really much reason to kill him. Honestly, you can just go around him most of the time, and he won't follow you for very far. Nemesis, on the other hand, even though his encounters are scripted, he'll follow you a lot further, especially in the RPD. And he does get a couple of pretty nasty jump scares along the way. I also like the fact that he is killable, despite the fact that it will take a fair amount of resources to do so, but the game knows this and it will reward you. Because I believe the first 2 times you will get upgrade parts to make the handgun a lot better. The 3rd time, I think, was a first aid pack, which lets you carry, essentially hold 3 first aid sprays in 1 item slot. 4 and 5 were upgrades to the shotgun, although I honestly prefer the standard shotgun over the upgraded one. And everyone after that is an infinite ammo upgrade, though I don't think anyone's probably going to be getting that unless you're either cheating or playing on easy mode. still, between that and the fact that it has the quick decision system in it, which does also adds a lot of replayability, because, well, yeah, some of the outcomes are basically the same. Like, you either run from, like, a zombie or you do something to kill them. But some of them will change how the story progresses. And there's another, like, hidden one that people probably miss. If you go to um, the gas station or the, convenience store first will change part of the story. But there's several of the QuickTime events that will also change how certain events happen and how Carlos reacts to you when you first meet him. And there's also one near the end, which will completely change the ending. So I got a lot of mileage out of that game. I like the fact that it was a bit longer and you had to be more careful with your resources. And the fact that this is one of the few games where a stalker enemy just works so well. And for its time, that was pretty damn amazing. Really, the only thing I can give it is the fact that there is reused content. Because just about everything about it was just better than 2, honestly. So, even though I think it's probably objectively a little better than 1 as well, but, you know, my love for the first one is still unmatched, but still an S tier. Pretty amazing that they had such a strong start with that original trilogy, just all 3 of them being bangers back to back. Now, unfortunately, the first spin-off, which was the 3rd game I've played, did not go over so well. Probably the biggest... well, part of it's because the story and the voice acting are both terrible. But I think a big stickling point with that is just the fact that it's like only an hour and a half long. But the reason for that is because this was originally a light gun game. And when they ported it to the West, it lost that capability. Though I've heard from people who actually have played that, it's probably better that they did that because the controls are really unwieldy. I know the meta score this game has, and I do not think it's nearly as bad as people make it out to be. It's playable. It's just, again, the main sin is the terrible voice acting and the fact that it's so damn short. And for a first-person game, the controls aren't particularly great, but it's manageable once you get used to it. It does have a fair amount of replayability, though, because it is kind of one of the first instances of a 3D roguelike, if you think about it, because if you die, you have to start the whole thing over. And normally I hate that kind of thing, but again, because the game is so short, and for me it's like pretty replayable, and you can carry over weapons and ammo you've collected when you die, so that's a plus. But I will say it's a guilty pleasure for me, but objectively I can't put it higher than a D. I just don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. But again, I also paid $15 for it, so I can understand people who paid $50 might have been a little pissed off. Anyway, moving on, Code Veronica, or Code Veronica X, as most people probably know it as, since I doubt a lot of people played that original Dreamcast version. Honestly, there's not that much difference between the two, apart from, I think, X has some extra cutscenes. Again, I played this after Remake and Zero, but I thought it was pretty good. I don't know if this is, like, part of the main series, since it's not numbered, and the next main game after Zero was 4, but I'm pretty sure, despite its name, it is one of the main games, even though it doesn't have a number in it. If it's not, then it's the best spin-off ever done. But, again, I think it is a main game. It plays like a main game. Its story is in place of a main game. I will say that despite the fact that it looked pretty good, and they did something interesting with the camera, it still uses fixed camera angles and tank controls, but the camera is a lot more dynamic. But that also meant the backgrounds were no longer pre-rendered, but for you going 3D instead of pre-rendered, they did look pretty good for their time. And honestly, the visuals do hold up for the most part. It didn't have of the original games, it didn't have the best OST, but it was still decent. It kind of does the same thing as 3, where it forgoes multiple characters, which honestly most of them from this point on do the same thing. but it does have a longer play time, though around the 2/3 point, you switch to Chris for the rest of the game, apart from one brief point where you return to playing as Claire. Story-wise, I think it's pretty decent. The main stickling point is Steve. He is annoying, though I don't think he's unbearably annoying for the most part, apart from like a couple scenes. I don't like the fact that this game recast Wesker as Richard Waugh, and who unfortunately would go on to voice Wesker again in Bolt Zero, despite the fact that a far better one had been cast in the remake. And he also showed up in the original Ada minigame in 4, but thankfully they wised up and stopped using him after that. But yeah, I do not like Richard Waugh's voice as Wesker. I've heard some people like it, and I'm just like, why? He's worse than the original, and I don't even really hate the original that much. Anyways, gameplay-wise, this is probably the hardest of... Well, no, Zero's probably the hardest, but, like, putting that aside, this is probably one of the hardest of them, but I kind of like the extra challenge. There are a couple of fuck yous, because if you don't know when that split point is coming, you can lose a good chunk of inventory if it's still in Claire's inventory instead of in an item box. So, for anybody who hasn't played this yet, when you get to the Arctic base and are about to leave it, put everything away except for a couple healing items in the sniper rifle. That's all you need. Anyways, this game did have some interesting boss fights as well. I kind of wish there was a bit more post-game, because there's not really much in terms of unlockables. And the extra minigame is kind of like a worse Mercenaries. But... fun fact, this game has a first-person mode in that Mercenaries, and if you play the GameCube version, I don't know, this might be doable in the PS2 one as well, but if you play the GameCube version, there is a cheat if you use Game Shark that will make the game toggleable at the first person, so you can play the entire main game from a first-person perspective. It's kind of funny. But A tier, great game. Not as good as the original trilogy, but still pretty good. Gaiden, this is kind of an interesting one. I know a lot of people don't like it because of its combat, but you have to remember this is a Game Boy game, and this is their attempt at putting a Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color, and I think they did a pretty alright job of making a survival horror for the original Game Boy, without making it a severely compromised pseudo 3D experience. I'm pretty sure this game is not canon, though, so if you don't like it, you don't have to play it. Like, that story, there is no way that shit is canon. This game does have limited resources, but when you go to initiate combat, it goes to this weird first-person sequence where you have to, you kind of have to, like, time your button inputs along a slider to make it whether you hit or miss, which I know I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it, but you really have to like either try it or watch it to understand it. Though if you played an indie game by the name of You Will Die Here Tonight, it's kind of similar to that, except it's timing based instead of aiming based. Which, speaking of which, if anybody who played Gaiden and actually liked it, I would recommend checking You Will Die Here Tonight, because it does have that a similar feel to it. My main complaint for Gaiden is the fact that enemies respawn. So, but your resources don't, so you really have to be careful on which fights you actually take. And honestly, unless you're forced into a fight, you're better off just avoiding enemies unless something's just blocking your way and you have to shoot your way through. Which, by the way, the knife can be useful, because usually you have 2 or 3 characters in your quote-unquote party at a time, so it's best to equip one of them with a knife in case you are low on ammo and run out. Because as long as you're not engaging a boss or certain enemies that have range capabilities, the knife is actually usable in this game. But overall, I think it's an okay experience for a Game Boy game, so I will say it's a low B for that. Survivor 2. I did not play this one because it was only released in Japan and Europe, but from what I've seen, it's basically a crappy retelling of Code Veronica, with gameplay that's even worse than Survivor. So I never bothered to try it, but you know, if you want to emulate it, knock yourself out. it doesn't look like it's worth playing to me. Which, speaking of stuff that I've never tried, mobile game. Only reason it's on there because I didn't make this list, and I'm not talking about any of the mobile games. I don't care. Um, Now for something that's actually good, we move on to the remake. So this is probably one of the the gold standard of how to do a remake. It retains most of what made the original good, and most of its feel, most of its story, while also expanding on it. Some of the puzzles are different. The story, while the same, does unfold differently. There's new and more deeper story events. The new OST for the most part is actually pretty good and adds to the ambience. The new graphics were excellent for their time, and the atmosphere went from more of a creepy B movies type horror to actually trying to be scary, and they did a really good job at it. The main reason, will say I prefer the original though, is the new Deadhead mechanic or Crimson Head mechanic. It was an interesting idea, don't get me wrong, but I don't like the fact that you have to constantly go between certain points to get, unless you want to waste flame rounds, you have to go between certain points to refill your canteen with kerosene, so you can set the zombies on fire so they don't mutate. Because if they mutate, you have to kill them again, and they're harder to deal with the second time around. Unless of course, you blow their head off, in which case you don't have to worry about that anymore. Which you're only going to do with a well-aimed shotgun blast at point-blank range, a shot from the Magnum, which is a complete waste, or a lucky headshot with a pistol. And I would be okay with this whole concept if they didn't also reduce the amount of enemies in the mansion in comparison to the original to make up for that. So if you go around burning most of the corpses, there's just less encounters in general. I will say most of the boss fights are better, though. There is probably less resources in this, so if you're playing on anything higher than normal, it's a lot harder to kill everything unless you're really good at burning all the bodies. So I guess this is probably a better of a survival experience than the original was in that regard. But despite my gripes with it, it is a gold standard for a remake for just having so much respect for the original, but also expanding upon it. And that's the main reason why I'm going to say, I'm going to put it up in S tier, but, not at the top because of that. Although, one more thing I do like is the fact that they expanded on the different characters. Because in the original, there were differences, but in this one it has all those differences, plus Chris supposedly has better chances of headshotting an enemy, and he has more health. So, and he also carries the lighter around in his unique slot, and he has a better defense item. But, Jill has the same advantages from the original game in having access to the grenade launcher, can get the shotgun early, can get helped with from Barry to deal with the Plant 32 if you do the right thing to do it. And yeah, Alice also has the lockpick. But yeah, gold standard for remakes. Not quite as good as the original, in my opinion, but still an excellent game. I will say I kind of prefer the original GameCube release because the remaster has a bug in it where some of the music tracks will play too fast, and that's kind of immersion breaking. So if you pick up the remaster, I would suggest getting, unless they fixed it, which I don't think they ever did, I would suggest getting the PC version because there is a mod out there that will fix the soundtrack bug. Zero, on the other hand, you can go with either or because it doesn't have that issue, but I like Zero, but it's probably the weakest of the classic games, or the main classic games, I should say. Because, well, it does do some things differently. The inventory system is kind of problematic. Yeah, you essentially get 12 slots because you get 6 between the two characters. You have to, number one, arm them both, so that's at least 2 slots covered by the handgun and ammo. And number 2, there's certain weapons that will take up 2 slots. And actually, most of them will, apart from them, the handgun, the Magnum, and that's about it, honestly. Everything else takes like 2 slots. Um, and since there are no item boxes, if you need to transport something that you didn't need before into a different part of whatever level you're on, you have to go back. You have to, first of all, you have to empty your inventory. So then you have to go back, pick up the item, and bring it to where you need. Which, don't leave the hook shot behind because you will need that again. Fair warning. At least until you get to the treatment plant, in which case I think that's when you can finally ditch it for good. This game does have a pretty strong low point. The treatment plant is kind of dull compared to the training facility and the train. And that's where you spend like the last third of the game at. Between those issues and the fact that the story has like a lot of contradictions in it, and I think, and given the fact this is a prequel, like, yeah, they show what happened to like the one Stars member who you didn't actually see their fate of in the original game or the remake. You finally get to see what happened to Edward. It doesn't really show much of Bravo Team in general, which is kind of stupid. Like, there's 3 scenes with Enrico, and everyone else is just kind of like there in the intro and fucks off. Like, I think if there's like an unlockable like epilogue where you could show Rebecca's movements in the mansion before Alpha Team arrived, and you could see like a bit more of Bravo Team, that would have been appreciated. But they didn't do that, so it's a decent game, but it was disappointing. So I'm gonna say that's a B tier. Dead Aim. So yeah, after 0, we got a slew of spin-offs for the PS2 until 4 finally came out. But the first one, Dead Aim, was another light gun game, and unlike Survivor, this one did not lose its light gun functionality in its localization. I will say you can play it with a regular controller, but it's not as interesting to do it that way. Because if you play it with a GunCon 2, the GunCon 2 actually has a D-pad on the back of the gun, so you don't need to use your controller in addition to the gun itself. And while I wish the whole game had been in first person instead of swapping between third when you're moving and first when you're shooting, it is a unique experience, and I do like the idea of like a FPS light gun experience, although given like, the Wii's ability, that kind of became redundant later on. But I kind of wish it had been a PS3 game, because the GunCon 3 has an additional stick on it, so you could have they could have made something akin to the FPS mode in the Time Crisis 4 PS3 version, where you play the full game in first person and you can move and shoot at the same time. But I can't fault it too much for that. What I can fault it for is the story is absolutely terrible. This has probably one of the worst stories in the series, and it has some of the most unlikable characters in the series. So don't play it for the story, just play it if you're interested in the gameplay. I'm going to say it's a low B. Because, like, the gameplay's fun, it does get kind of old, and it is kind of short. Outbreak. So I'm going to rate these 2 games at the same time, because they're basically just... Outbreak File 2 was just an expansion of Outbreak 1. These games were online co-op games, though they were fully playable in single-player offline. But as a single-player experience, they're not great. Normally, I do not give a shit about online, but since I had a network adapter and a friend who also played these, I was actually able to play both of these games online back in the heyday. It was a pretty damn unique experience, because having classic Resident Evil in a co-op, and not only a co-op, but one where you don't have much communication ability with your teammates, and you can never tell if they're alive or dead unless you stumble upon them when they're dead, was kind of tense, and I like the feeling. Especially since most people didn't have, like, voice over IP back then, and most of them were using, like, Ventrilo or TeamSpeak for, like, Counter-Strike, not for Outbreak. So getting in a group of a random lobby, or like usually or in my case with another friend in a random lobby, and we didn't have the ability to talk to each other, was a pretty unnerving experience. I would say as an online game, it's an A tier, but unfortunately, that online is dead. And I'm assuming there are workarounds around it, but like, who's actually playing that? As a single player experience, it's a low B, so I'm just gonna say it's a B tier for both of them. I think File 1 was a bit better, even because it had better levels for the most part. Like, Outbreak File 2, the only memorable level is the police station. Everything else is just kind of like, who gives a shit? And the only thing it really did better was in the single player department, because in this game, and 2, you could actually select which characters you brought along for your team, whereas 1, it was automatically assigned to you. And that can be kind of helpful, because bringing Yoko along as your pack mule can be really helpful. And oh yeah, fun fact. Apparently, despite the fact that most of these characters never appeared again, the Alyssa, the journalist, is brought back in Requiem of all things. So yeah, I guess there's a bit reason to play those now. But Resident Evil 4, much like 2, I think this game is kind of overrated. No, don't get me before you click off the video. I'm not saying the game is bad. Far from it. It is a pretty good game. I just don't think it's as great as people made it out to be. I think a lot of people were just excited to play something different. And there were other people that jumped on the hype train as their first game because they didn't want to deal with the tank controls for whatever reason. Even though the game still has tank controls. But this game gets a lot of undeserved credit too, because a lot of people say, "Oh, it introduced over-the-shoulder aiming." No, it didn't. No, it didn't. There were other games that did it first. That just popularized it. Probably the only mechanic was completely new to this game was the inventory system, which kudos to them. That is a pretty good system for this type of game. And yeah, that's the only thing unique. The only thing completely unique it did, but it did move the series forward for better and worse. Again, like I said, it's a really good game, but it moved the series into the wrong direction, which I think most old school fans will agree with on that at least. And I kind of have a grudge against it for that, I will admit. That being said, the game was pretty good value proposition because it was longer than probably all of the previous games. The story was pretty decent. It was fresh because it did give for a while at least give you the feeling of what the hell is going on again because you're clearly not dealing with zombies. So the Plagas were not only like a new unknown, but they were unique in the way of like the regular enemies could mutate at any time. And plus, you're just dealing with hordes in general, even if they're not mutated. Was just like can be pretty tedious at times. This game gave me many a death on my first playthrough. The other problem I have with it is this experience kind of diminishes a bit as you go, because most people agree the village is the best part of the game. Creepy atmosphere, creepy villagers, and again, you have no idea what's going on. But then Ashley shows up, and she's kind of annoying. And game turns into an escort quest, although it's not terrible in that regard because as long as you're paying attention, you don't have to worry about her too much. And most of the time, most of the enemies will try to grab her and take her away instead of try to actually kill her. Though you can get an instant game over if they do get away. And there is one annoying instance where you have to play as her and it will force stealth section, but it is what it is. The problem I have is like the castle is still creepy atmosphere and still fun, but fucking Shrieking Napoleon is impossible to take seriously. I hate Salazar. Not because I hate him like the way you're supposed to. I hate him because he's fucking annoying. And he's impossible to take seriously. And it only gets worse from there because the island part of the game is just a drag. The only good part of the island is the regenerators are just genuinely fucking terrifying. But other than that, it's just like, ooh, now we've got soldiers enemies, and that guy has a machine gun. It's okay. I guess we're just throwing the subtlety out the window. But again, despite my gripes for it, it is a genuinely good game. The shooting did feel good for its time, and the laser sight mechanic was pretty good for it. There's a lot of content for what it offers, because in addition to that long campaign, there was also a new and better Mercenaries mode, as well as the Assignment Ada minigame. And then the PS2 port actually got an entirely new side campaign for Ada, which was pretty good. I will say I had the original GameCube version, but I got rid of it for the Wii version because the Wii version has at the time was the definitive version because it had the better visuals, performance, and cutscenes of the GameCube version, but with the extra content of the PS2 version. Now, obviously, that's been negated a bit because this has been ported and remastered multiple times. But I think I still like the Wii version the best because the motion controls are actually that make the game better. Because number one, pointer aiming is always going to be better than sticks. Like I'm sorry, it just is. Maybe not as good as a mouse, but still. And it also made the fucking QTEs, which is another gripe I have with the game. Fuck those QTEs. It also made the QTEs a lot more bearable because you either had to waggle it or you had to press A and B. The fun part is though, is you can waggle it and you'll at the start of a QTE and you'll just get it, unless it becomes a button, the button input one. In which case, you can still waggle it and press the buttons and you'll get through the QTE, which is a hell of a lot more forgiving than what the original version did. But yeah, it's a great game, but it's kind of overrated. Umbrella Chronicles. This is the first. This is really when we start getting into the era of the quote-unquote modern Resident Evil. Though I really call this 7th gen Resident Evil because that's where most of these games were on 7th gen consoles, except for apart from the games that were multi or cross gen like Revelations 2. All of these games except for 4 and Umbrella Corps were on the 7th gen consoles. But Umbrella Chronicles was originally a Wii exclusive, then I think they ported it to the PS3, and I don't know if the Xbox got one or not, but this is best played on the Wii because unless you had the Move controllers, you were probably were not going to have a good time because this is a light gun game. There's a pretty decent amount of content for a light gun game, and the gameplay was pretty solid. My main gripe for this one is the levels that retell parts from Resident Evil 1, 3, and 0 have a severely retconned the story, though I don't think that this version of the story is canon in any shape or way, so it's not that big of a deal. I like the extra modes that contain new scenarios, like the levels where you play as Wesker or the one where you play as Rebecca in between 0 and Resident Evil 1, which is what I wanted from 0 in the first place. And the brand new scenario that takes place after 3 is fairly decent. Don't particularly like the new villain though. But the shooting was pretty solid, and the Wiimote's pointer controls did the job well. The game was a bit choppy, I will say, so it did give it a bit of jank, though it wasn't as bad as Darkside Chronicles in that regard. But for a light gun spin-off, it was very solid. So I'd say a high B for that one. Resident Evil 5. This took a lot of the complaints I had about things I didn't like about 4 and doubled down on them. And it moved... 4 at least was still a survival horror. 5 was a horror-themed shooter, as was 6. They took it to ridiculous levels, the action to ridiculous levels. The story was not good. They completely ruined Wesker's character from being a shadowy figure working to an unknown goal to just being, as they say in the game, a freaking comic book villain. And I don't like Sheva's character at all. Like, I get the reason they probably had to put her in there because they had to have some black characters that weren't evil, or else they'd be accused of racism, which they ended up being accused of that anyway, which anybody who actually played the game knows that's bullshit. But I don't dislike her because she's, my black protagonist. I dislike her because she's pointless. She offers very little to the story other than just being the guide, which she kind of fails at most of the time. And she's only there because they've shoehorned the game into a co-op experience. So even if you're playing single player, you have to drag her around. And much like Resident Evil 0, you have to juggle with her inventory. And if you want her to use anything other than a handgun, you have to take the handgun away. And if you give her health, she will heal at the slightest. She'll waste healing at the slightest scratch, which is stupid, so you have to manually heal as well. So she's kind of useless as an AI companion. That's not to say the game is, like, overly hard because of it. It's not, unless you play on the highest difficulty. It's just kind of annoying. And it's also a lot shorter of an experience than 4 was. Like, it's probably about a 6-hour game, 5 or 6-hour game, so... Honestly, it's obviously that means it's going to be longer than playing one of the originals as a replay, but it's going to be shorter than playing any of those games for your first time, if that makes sense. But yeah, between the fact that it was overdone, the action was overdone, too many explosions, the bad story, the forced co-op experience, it's an alright game. It didn't help that the DLC kind of sucked, because one of them was just basically mostly just a cutscene with like 2 encounters with the new enemy type and then a boss fight, and that was it. And then the other one was just like showing how the other character got out and throwing Barry in randomly for whatever reason. So yeah, it's all right. It's not bad, but it's not the greatest thing ever. Darkside Chronicles, you would have think they would have like known what they were doing after Umbrella Chronicles, since this time they were doing 2 Code Veronica and then like an origin story for between Leon and Krauser. It's too bad that origin story had fuck all to do with the reason, or at least at the time, had fuck all to do with the reason why Krauser was a traitor. And it had fuck all to do with Resident Evil 4, honestly. But the new scenario itself is like the only reason to play this game, because the retellings of 2 and Code Veronica are even more butchered than what they did in Umbrella Chronicles, number 1. Number 2, the game runs worse. And number 3, the camera is atrocious. See, the camera for the most part in Umbrella Chronicles was mostly stable apart from when it forced you to move along the path. This one, the camera jitters all over the damn place, like in a found footage style. So if you have motion sickness, have fun with that. And even if you don't have motion sickness, it will fuck with your aim and make you waste ammo. So good luck like trying to get the annoyingly strict time requirements to get the actual ending in this, which I still haven't done because of how strict it is and how annoying the camera jump jitter is. So, low C for that one. Mercenaries 3D. I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to release a full-priced game, which is just the Mercenaries mode, which might have been understandable if it like had a shit ton of content, but it does not. And not only that, but almost all of the content is the whole thing is literally just a rehash of Resident Evil 5's Mercenary mode. Which, I know some people like 5's, but to me, I don't know. I did not like 5's. I think, believe it or not, I actually think 6 had a better Mercenaries mode than 5 did. And 4 as well. But, there's some of the new music. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. Another reason I will say a good thing about 4, it was the last game that really had a good soundtrack, apart from maybe Umbrella Chronicles. Because after that, they moved to, like, for the 7th gen games, they had all decided to use more, like, generic action movie soundtracks that are, like, boring as shit most of the time. Or for the RE Engine games, their soundtrack is barely there at all. Because they went for the modern, non-intrusive soundtrack, which is boring in a completely different way. But I will say Mercenaries 3D at least had a decent soundtrack for it. And you didn't have to listen to the same theme over and over again like you did with 5. But apart from that, it's literally just a dumbed-down version. Well, it's not dumbed down. It's just a bit more tedious to play because of the controls, but it is basic bitch game. It does have more content, a bit more content than 5 Mercenaries mode did, but not enough to justify the price. This should have been like a $15 eShop game, not a full-priced retail release. And that's the only reason I even bought it when I did, which is like when I could get it for like 15-20 bucks. But I played through it once and will never touch it again. Because I'd rather just play the Mercenaries mode in the other games. So the only reason play this is if for whatever reason you don't have 4, 5, or 6, because you're better off just playing those the mercenaries modes in those games than just touching this. So D tier you go. And the other complete bitch about I have for this is the controls. It doesn't support C stick, and by that I mean the little nub on the new 3DS, nor does it support the Circle Pad Pro. And it doesn't have, unlike the 3DS version of Revelations, it does not have gyro aiming. So have fun using the buttons to aim. Anyways, moving on from that pile of mediocrity, we have Revelations. This was originally released as a time, I guess, I don't know if it was potentially timed or not, but a 3DS exclusive. I didn't actually own that release, but I did play a demo of it, and I remember really liking the gyro aiming. I don't know if it supported the nub or the Circle Pad Pro or not, but honestly, the gyro aiming made it so you didn't really need it. Around the time I was going to pick it up is when they announced the HD version, so I just ended up waiting and picking it up for the Wii U, which I kind of prefer the Wii U version because it does make inventory management a tad bit easier on the gamepad. But I don't know if the Revelations games are considered main games or not because they are side stories. I think they're canonical. I think they're just considered side games. Because I'm pretty sure they mentioned events that happen in these games and some of the other games, unless I'm just remembering wrong. But story-wise, Revelations 1 was actually decent. Better than 5's at least. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty good. Though it would have been nice if if you'd spent the whole game solo instead of having a partner for sections of it. I will say that most of the time the game is good is when you're playing as Jill, because Chris's segments aren't terrible, they're not that good. But the worst part of the game is when you have to play as those two dumbasses. Anybody who's played that knows exactly what I'm talking about. Plus the final boss kind of sucked, but it is what it is. Like, that final boss was probably the hardest final boss in the whole series. Which made doing the Nightmare run an actual fucking nightmare, because man did I have to redo that fight a lot. But, yeah, its atmosphere is so much better than 5's. It doesn't have nearly as much over-the-top action. And this felt like the closest to being a survival horror again since 4. Honestly, this game is what Resident Evil 5 should have been. Like, putting the relevance of the story aside, just from a gameplay perspective, it's so much better than the game that preceded it, and definitely better than the game that followed it. So, I'm going to say it's an A tier. Like, if you're going to play a spin-off, play that one. This next spin-off, Operation Raccoon City, I think is another game that gets a bit more hate than it deserves. I'm not going to say it's a good game, because it's not. But the problem is this game was like it is fully playable single player, but like the Outbreak games, it was made for co-op. But unlike the Outbreak games, it's not that fun. I like the idea of revisiting Raccoon City from another perspective, but the problem is number one, they misrepresented the game because it's supposedly going to have let you do all these things to change the story, and that does not happen until the very end. And all that change really does is just determine whether or not Leon and Claire die, which anybody knows that's not canon. But I mean, it does show some other interesting events that go along with it. Like, the first mission is actually pretty cool because it takes place during the theft of the G virus during Resident Evil 2. And you do see Hank again, which is kind of another bitch I have for the game. It's like, why are we playing as these Black Ops Umbrella guys, but Hank is, and yes, I know his name's Hank, but I find Hank funnier. But he's not only not a playable character, he only shows up in that first mission and then fucks off, never to be seen again. That seems like a wasted opportunity to me. But the game is fairly short, so it's not like it's a huge time commitment. It's probably more fun played in co-op, but again, it is doable in single player, though I will suggest playing as a demolitionist if you're doing single player, because A, he's a shotgun expert, which is very helpful for the larger mutations, and B, his grenade ability is pretty useful. But yeah, beyond that, the characters are kind of imbalanced. The story is kind of pointless. Probably my main issue is a lot of the enemies are bullet sponges. Like, the zombies are fine, but like, and the soldiers are fine, but like, some things like the hunters take way too many hits to bring down. And don't even get me started about some of the boss fights. Which, if you're playing as co-op, is probably not too big of a deal. But if you're playing single player, I highly suggest you not play on anything higher than normal. Otherwise, you're not gonna have a good time. There are a few cool points here and there through the campaign. Again, that first mission is pretty cool. There is a part later on where you go up against Nemesis. That was actually a pretty well done fight. Um, and it is kind of interesting at the end. The players are split up, and depending on how they vote, to handle dealing with Claire and Leon, and they have to fight each other to see which ending you get and kill each other, which is stupid in single player, but was probably kind of a cool twist in co-op. But beyond those things, it's just an okay game. It's not terrible like people make it out to be. It's just okay. One thing I don't like how they did was the DLC. You get the first mission for free, but I think you have to buy the other two for like $10 each, which is like missions 2 through 5, and then the like 6 through 10 or 6 through 8, something like that. It's like half and half. But the problem I have is it's just playing through the game again from another different perspective. It doesn't really add to the story because you're playing as special forces soldiers from the army. They had an opportunity to have a UCBS campaign, and that actually would have been really interesting if they had done that. To see some of the fates of some of the soldiers that you saw during Resident Evil 3, and maybe change the fates of, like, I don't know, Kyle or Nikolai or something, or giving you the option to side with Nikolai and join him in what he does, and have that be like a fight between players. But either way, they had a lot of opportunity for a UCBS campaign, but they didn't do that. Instead, we just got a C tier game. What is definitely not a C tier is Resident Evil 6. I don't like this game. In fact, this is probably one of my least favorite games in the series, apart from a few of the spin-offs. There are a few cool points. There are a few, or I wouldn't even say cool. There are a few parts where the game is like actually somewhat enjoyable. Like, the earlier parts of Leon's campaign are okay, right up until you get to that first boss fight, and then it just shits itself inside out from there. Then the middle, apart from like the beginning and end of Ada's campaign is like somewhat decent. And the one level from Chris's campaign where you deal with the invisible snake is actually kind of tense. But the rest of Chris's campaign is shit. The second half of Leon's campaign is shit. And Jake's campaign is shit from start to finish. Like, I appreciate the fact that they finally brought Sherry back, of all things, but like, same thing with 5. It's like, there are other partner characters they could have brought back. Like, they could have brought back Rebecca finally for Resident Evil 5, but they didn't do that either. And 6 is just like, who gives a shit about Helena? Who gives a shit about, like, I don't even remember what Chris's partner's name is. Nobody cares about Jake, especially since he's never brought up again for supposedly being Wesker's kid. And that was another issue I had with 5 as well as story. Is like, apart from like making Spencer also a comic book evil with a god complex, literally, the whole thing with Wesker being a clone was like fucking stupid as hell. And given how old Wesker was when Resident Evil 1 happened, which happened in the 90s, the technology of cloning someone, like, that would have had to have been in the 70s. It's just like, no, that's stupid. But yeah, 6 also has plenty of really stupid plot points. I don't even want to get into them. It's just like, it is such a pointless story, and the developers know it's pointless because apart from the assassination of the president, most of what happens in 6 is never brought up again. And rightfully so, because this game mostly felt like filler. And it drags on for far too long. Like, I appreciate the fact that it's a content-heavy game, but the problem is most of the content sucks. Like, if this had been, like, I don't know, Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil Remake, then that, yeah, that would have been appreciated, but not in 6. It is a chore to play, it drags on far too long, the story is terrible, it runs like shit, or at least it did on the original PS3 version. There's just nothing good about it. It's not a good action game, and it's not a good survival horror, so into the D tier you go. Um, Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do even worse than that. I'd rather play Survivor than 6. But Resident Evil Revelations 2, um, not sure what the point of this game was, to be honest. They decided to make this episodic for whatever stupid reason. It's got 4 parts, which you had to purchase individually, and every time you start a new part, it does that same previously on Resident Evil bullshit these kind of experiences have. Thankfully, they did release a physical version later on, which contained all 4 of the main episodes, although you still had to buy the extra DLC episodes. So, fuck me, I guess. But the story is kind of pointless, because a lot of what happens this is never brought up again. I guess the really only reason to play this for the story is just to like give closure to Barry and his family, which is kind of funny that they went that route because, like, after Resident Evil 1, you saw Barry briefly in one of the endings of 3, and he got an epilogue file, and you saw him in one of the DLCs for 5. That's it. But I can still appreciate that. It just would have been nice if it had been a bit more substantial than what it was. And I can't say I like Claire's particular part of the story, although, like, again, bring her back. I get it. And her partner character is also related to Barry, so, like, it kind of had to happen. Gameplay-wise, it's okay. Like, it's better than 5 and 6, but that's not saying a whole lot. Revelations 1 is a far more enjoyable game. And as is 4, obviously. I played the PS4 version. I have the PS4 version. It's a pretty smooth experience, I will give it that. Don't know how it performed on the previous gen consoles. I think this was cross-gen. But, yeah, it was a short game and kind of pointless. And the story, the story was okay. It was just the ending that was kind of stupid. It was the whole thing with, like, another Wesker clone trying to pass on her memories to someone else, and then just when you think Barry finally gets a bit of closure, it's like the very end of that epilogue is like, well, fuck me, I guess. And that's only if you get the good ending, because the game does not tell you how to really get it, so if you fuck up during one of Claire's levels, you get the bad ending. But my gripes aside, the game is alright. It's not great, but it's not bad. I'm gonna say it's another B tier. Umbrella Corps. This was I thought this was originally an online-only game. But, apparently it does have a short single-player mode, but from what I can tell, there's no story to it, and it's basically like the Mercenaries 3D all over again, where it has fuck all content unless you're playing the multiplayer. Which I never played this game because, number one, it didn't get a physical version, so I had no reason to pick up a primarily multiplayer game. I'm not going to waste $20 on it. And plus, the game is dead, and from my understanding, it died very quickly. I don't know why Capcom keeps doing this, where they keep trying to make these multiplayer spin-offs. Nobody likes these, nobody cared. The only time they struck gold with that was Outbreak, and honestly, even then, that was a cult classic, because I don't think the population count of that game was ever that heavy. But, yeah, never played it, don't care. And now we finally get to the RE Engine games. The first one, Resident Evil 7, it was basically like Resident Evil 4 in the fact that we've got something fresh and something actually scary again. I'm going to go as far as to say this was like probably a fresher experience than 4 was. And definitely a scarier one. This is 7 was probably one of the scariest games in the series. I don't know if I would say it's the scariest. I think Remake still holds that one. But they did rely heavily on stalker type enemies, because like you pretty much have to avoid the family members until the game specifically says like, okay, now it's time to kill them. Which can be a bit of annoying on your first playthrough, but honestly, if you've been paying attention, it's pretty easy to tell when you should and should not engage them. I will say I do wish there were more varieties of the molded, and there were more of them, because there are times where you go through long stretches of this game where nothing is going on. And I get that a lot of the older games had that too, but usually when that happened, it was when you were backtracking for whatever reason, not exploring new parts of the map. But despite that, despite its slow pacing, and I know a lot of people didn't like the first person change. Me, I kind of liked it, because if we're not gonna play with tank controls and fixed camera angles, first person is the way to go, because number one, it's more immersive, and number two, you feel it a bit more. It's just, at least for me anyway, just everything that's going on, you feel it. But the story was pretty decent, actually, which is surprising considering the the writers for this series have sucked since 5, and the writers for the current RE Engine games, as if anyone who plays the remakes can attest, they have zero respect for where the series came from. Like 7 and Village are both fine, but like despite some of the retconning that goes on, but like with the remakes, it's just like holy shit, these guys have no respect for what's already established and just want to turn Resident Evil what they think it should be, and fuck those guys. But despite that, 7 is still a pretty damn good game. Combat is pretty solid when you do it, and the boss fights are intense when you finally get to fight the family members. A lot of people don't like the boat, in which case, yeah, that's probably the weakest part of the game, but it's still kind of creepy in its own way, because apart from when you first start it and you have to stealth your way around because you don't have a weapon, but it doesn't take too long before you're able to fight again, and plus that you do get the machine gun. But I thought the boat was fine. Yeah, it's the weakest part of the game, but it's fine. But scare factor is great. Gameplay is also great. Probably my biggest complaint for this is the story, which, rather not the story itself, but rather the characters. The Baker family is very well done, but the Winters, on the other hand, are the biggest who gives a shit I've ever seen from this franchise. Like, not only is Ethan a forgettable protagonist, and I don't mean that because it's a first-person game, but he's just like, I do not care about this guy. And his wife is one of the probably the most unlikable bitch in the whole series. Like, there comes a point where you have to choose between saving Mia or saving Zoe. And the first time I played through it, the only reason I chose Mia is because I could tell the game was going to punish me if I didn't, because I wanted to fucking leave her ass behind. I hate Mia. And Village made me feel that even stronger. But the game, if you do that, the game does punish you for it, and you do get a different ending and a worse ending. But hey, that's more reason to play through the game twice. You get 2 different endings. I will say another thing negative about it. The DLC kind of sucked. It's not the worst ever, but like the banned footage are just mostly mini games. They don't really add much to the story apart from like showing what happened to Clancy before his eventual demise. The banned footage one is probably the better of the two, because even though the first one is essentially like a mercenaries type minigame, it's pretty well done. And the second one, even though it's only worth playing once, the escape room one, the second one is basically an escape room, and it's pretty clever actually in some of its puzzles. And it can be pretty creepy when you know you're about to get caught and you're wondering whether or not you put everything back in its proper place, otherwise you get your face stabbed. Banned footage 2, on the other hand, why do we need to put in a freaking shotgun roulette version of blackjack in there? Like seriously, that part of that, like I don't hate blackjack, but why the fuck would I want to pay for a DLC for a survival horror to play Saw Blackjack? Like seriously, and it adds nothing to the story. The other part, which is like a prequel to the main game, is actually pretty well done. The problem is it's only like 15-20 minutes. Number one, and number two, the gameplay is bare bones. Like you do have to solve a couple of puzzles to get the good ending, but good luck doing that without a guide your first time. Um, that really should have been free, to be honest. And banned footage does add a couple of side mini games too, so it's not like it's a total waste. It's just for those wanting like more story content, like myself. It's just like, yeah, it could have been better. Yeah, the problem is the other main paid content, which is the Zoe must. No, it's called like the End of Zoe or something. I'm glad we got to see like what happened to her. The problem is the gameplay for it is terrible because you literally, and I kid you not, play as Grandpa Joe running around punching the molded. I am not kidding about that. It's really stupid. It's like I get that, yeah, he's part of the family. That means she's stronger than your average person, but still, it's like old man running around punching the molded. Really, not even want to get started about the stupid alligators. You can craft a few makeshift weapons, but they're one use, and there are no guns. For $10, this should have been not only more substantial, but like the gameplay for it is just not good. But again, that's optional DLC. That's just me bitching about it. The main game is really good. I'm gonna say bottom of A for that one. Unfortunately, it's kind of downhill from there. 2 remake. I have mixed feelings about this one. On one hand, it's nice to see an expanded version of the second game. The problem is they did a lot more to reimagine it than remake it. So it's not like instead of like making it a gold star like the Resident Evil 1 remake, they just decided to essentially make it like more Resident Evil 4, I guess. Actually, not even say it feels like Resident Evil 4. It feels more like Revelations 1. I don't like the changes to the story. I like the expansion of the story, I just don't like the changes. Because they fucked with Ada's character pretty badly. Instead of being like someone that's like, you know, not a good person but is still likable, Ada's just a straight up bitch in the RE Engine games. Claire is also kind of more annoying in this one. I don't like the fact that they saved the whole Kendo thing for later instead of like, you know, sticking to the script. I do like the fact that in the intro you get to like play through that cutscene in the convenience store instead of just watching it through a cutscene. Like I had my hopes up good when that happened, but like it kind of went downhill from there. And I don't like the addition of the orphanage. I didn't like, which unfortunately Resident Evil Requiem mentions that, so it looks like 2 Remake is now the canon version, which sucks ass. In my mind, though, Resident Evil or OG Resident Evil 2 is still the canon one, so fuck Remake 2 in that regard. Gameplay wise, though, it is pretty solid. It's not the greatest, but it does a good job of keeping the atmosphere, especially in the police station, close to what it was in the original. I don't like how the Fat Man is way more in your face, especially since he shows up in the A story now, and he's just not fun to deal with. Like, he's not Nemesis. If it had been something more like Nemesis, it would have been fine. But, yeah, and then they gave him that stupid hat. It's like, really, guys? But, I don't know. Just the bastardized version of the story and the fact that it just doesn't have the same feel as OG did for its gameplay. Like, I know some people probably prefer the new Resident Evil 4 style gameplay, but for me, I just wish that it had done something akin to Remake, or to Resident Evil 1 Remake. So, it's good, but it's not great. That's not the greatest thing. I'm gonna say IB, I guess. 3 make on the other hand, oh boy, did they fuck this one up. Not only is the gameplay worse, because like it's really worse on like placement of resources, especially on the harder difficulties. If they butchered the story in 2, they completely destroyed it with 3. They changed most of the characters. Carlos, I swear, has had like 3 race swaps now. He went from like being like Latino in the original to being like Native American in Umbrella Chronicles, and this one he's like, I don't even know what the fuck he is. Especially with that stupid hair. And then there's Nemesis, and oh boy, did they make him into a bitch. He is like way easier to avoid and take down now, and that includes both the boss fights and when you're just dealing with him on the streets. So that's a lot of the intenseness of the original gone. And once again, like with Resident Evil 2, it plays more like a modern game, but it feels far worse, so it doesn't have that to its name. And they also cut out huge chunks of the game, like the clock tower is completely missing. And like the parts that are there are just shorter. And weirdly enough, they gave a ton more. They gave a ton more coverage to a character that's like gets one scene and then dies, which is Terrell, one of the mercenaries. Which I actually do kind of like the fact that they gave, a side character more screen time, because they did that with Richard as well in the Resident Evil 1 remake, and I appreciate that. But it should not come at the expense of the other characters. And it definitely should not come at the expense of the overall story. Just don't play this, please. Or if you do, play the original first and then play it. Like, it's not terrible, but it completely destroys the legacy of the original. If it had been its own thing, I would have been kinder to it, but as a remake, no. Into C tier you go. And I'd honestly rather play Operation Raccoon City than that. But they did kind of redeem themselves a bit when we get to Village. It's not as good as 7, especially since they took the more tense survival-oriented 7 and made it... It's still a first-person game, and it still has those elements of 7, but they were clearly trying to make it more like Resident Evil 4 again. Because there are times where there are still times where you go through long periods where nothing's going on, but it's definitely more action-heavy. I do appreciate there's more of a variety of what you're facing than 7 was, but apart from when you're dealing with the stalker type enemies and the boss fights, you're mostly dealing with like several different types of not werewolves and basic bitch zombies. But there is a better variety of locations. I'm not even gonna pronounce her name because I know what it is, but I hate saying it. Then I know people call her Lady D. I'm gonna call her Lady D's nuts. Like, her castle is actually pretty well done. What kind of sucks is that the dollhouse, and which is definitely the creepiest part of the game, but like there's nothing going on apart from when you're being chased by the fetus. And the reservoir, which is mostly just the boss fight. Those two felt like they had content cut down, because like the village itself, the castle and the factory felt like they were pretty well fleshed out, but those areas just like felt like they were cut down. They did bring the mercenaries mode back, though I think it's probably the worst it's ever been in this game. But it's still decent, but like I would rather play mercenaries than pretty much any other game in this one. It is a pretty meaty game. I think it's a bit longer than 7 was. 7 was, because I think the first time I played through 7, it took me about 10 hours. Village is probably closer to about 13, 14. The story kind of sucks, I will say. Like, if I didn't give a shit about the winters before, I give less of a shit about them now. The fact that they turned this into another fucking dad game by making you chase down your fucking baby. It's like, I already don't care about you two. What makes you think I'm going to care about some random ass baby that I'm just supposed to care about because it's a dad game? Thankfully, they finally got rid of the winters after this game. Although you do have to suffer through a DLC, and boy, the DLC was probably the worst it's ever been. I don't know what is it with Capcom and DLC. It's just they suck at it. At least for Resident Evil games. Because I heard like the Monster Hunter DLC is like a lot more substantial, but like the Resident Evil DLC is almost all sucked. And I say Village is probably the worst because all it adds is like a optional third person camera, which that should have been a free update or been there at the start. Even though I prefer first person, giving people the option is a good thing. And it adds like 2 or 3 new mercenary stages, and then the additional story campaign, which that story campaign sucked. Like most of the time, you just spend running around with nothing going on. You play as Rose, who I already didn't give a shit about before. I give less of a shit about now. And in the grand scheme of things, it's pointless because what happens there never comes up again in Requiem. So, like, all it is just a pointless epilogue. But, my griping aside, I will say Village is still pretty good. It definitely got its creepy moments and its atmosphere. It looked pretty decent. Really made you feel like you're in the freezing ass cold mountains. But yeah, I'm gonna say top of B maybe. Nah, I'd say bottom of A. It's pretty decent, and I did enjoy playing it in VR. I played the first time I played Seven. Maybe part of the reason I like Seven as much as I do is because I had the PS4 version, and I did have a PSVR 1 around that time, so I was able to play it in VR, even though the VR mode was kind of basic, because it only had head tracking, so you used a regular controller for everything else, but it was so much more immersive in VR, even with the basic mode. Unfortunately, they never updated it to work with the PSVR 2, and I've long gotten rid of the PSVR 1, because that thing was really clunky to set up. And they never, despite promising to do so, they never ported it to the VR mode to PC. So if you want to play that in VR and you don't have a PSVR 1, you play the PC version with mods. Village, on the other hand, there is a VR mod for it too, but I could never get that one to work properly, so I ended up getting this for the PS5 once I finally picked one up. And I got rid of my old ass Oculus Rift S that I was using finally to get a PSVR 2 because I wanted to play Village and Resident Evil 4 in VR. Number one, and number two, they finally released an adapter which made it PC compatible, so I can use it as both a PC headset and the PS5 headset. Then it's a pretty decent headset. But playing Village in VR mode is definitely better, in my opinion. That's probably why I would say it's a low A instead of a high B. Reverse, another fucking multiplayer add-on, which I had this on Village on PC Verse, so I think that's the only reason I got this, is because this is supposed to be like an extra multiplayer mode for Village, though it was available to buy as a standalone. I will describe this in one phrase: who gives a shit? It's a generic ass PvP mode. Nobody asked for. I think the game died before they finally took it down, and yeah, the game is, since the servers went down, the game is completely unplayable, since there's no single player or local modes. End of the F tier you go. Resident Evil 4 Remake. I'm gonna go on a limb and say this is the one time I actually think the remake is just, I actually do prefer the remake to the original. I think the original does have better, I will say by saying the original obviously has a better OST, and I think it should have been free, but I like the fact that you can purchase the original OST for it, like you can with Resident Evil 2 Remake, because boy, did Resident Evil 2 Remake also have a shitty OST. Because Resident Evil 4's OST is barely there. And I will also say that I think the original version of 4, the story itself is better, even though there are some things that are better about 4 in terms of the characters. But the story itself, I think, is better in the original. And the original definitely had better pacing, because I do appreciate the fact that they expanded on the village, but like there are parts of this game they feel like it drags on a bit too long, and they did not need to expand the island. Um, from a gameplay standpoint, I think this is better. Not only because it's VR capable, which is definite plus for me, like the VR version is great, but also because even non VR, the combat is just smoother and better overall than original 4. I will say I don't like the fact that they reduced the larger enemies in favor of making them tankier and more deadly. Because like I think there's like 3 of those blind fuckers in the whole game. There's definitely more than that in the original, and there's like 2 encounters with like the fucking big ass giants compared to the original, which I know had more than that. Um, they even cut out one of the boss fights, which I'm actually grateful for, because that boss fight was really pointless. Although they did bring it back into the Ada mode, so much for that. As well as bringing that stupid laser sequence in, throwing that into the Ada mode as well. Because that laser quick time event was stupid. But yeah, aside from the pacing, the combat is just so much better. The movement's better. Ashley is far less annoying, both in terms of taking care of her and in her character herself. People complain so much about like the fact that they tone her looks down, which okay, I'll agree with the outfit, but like her actual looks, I think she looks better in this one. And her voice acting is also and dialogue is also so much better. Um yeah, I will take Resident Evil 4 remakes Ashley over the original any day. Even that part where you play as her is just like better for the most part. Although it does drag on a bit longer than it needed to, much like other parts of this game. Salazar is so much less annoying, and I also like the fact that the statue, instead of it coming to life and chasing you, which is another part in 4 that was just like, huh? That was really stupid. To just being like this movable head that has a flamethrower attached to it, and you can deal with it by shooting it out. That was so much better than that stupid robot that just follows you and turns into a quick time event. Like that was so hard to take seriously in the original. I don't like what they did to Krauser. Yeah, I like the fact that they got rid of that stupid QT cutscene and changed it to an actual knife fight. But his character is just like really just ruined in this one. Like his villainy makes even less sense now, and his voice acting is just like really overdone. So yeah, despite that, I will say like character wise, apart from Krauser, this one is better. And not being yapped at by Sadler is also a plus because him talking to Leon over the radio so much is just kind of like, why would you do that? But yeah, apart from like bloating up certain parts of the castle and the village, just the atmosphere in this is just so much better, and the gameplay is as well. So I'm gonna say it's still an A, but it's better than the OG in my opinion. But I would still recommend playing the OG first if you haven't already, because again, like there are some things in the original that are just you need to experience it at least once. And I would say that for any of those games compared to the remakes. And then we finish off with Requiem. I actually just played this a couple weeks ago for the first time. I have mixed feelings on it. I don't like Grace as a character, even though like I get the whole point of her is to make her player feel vulnerable, which yeah, they did a good job with that, but she is just annoying, honestly. Like I'll give the voice actor credit for doing a good job of making her sound awkward and weak, but like damn are her lines annoying sometimes. And I do think she could have used a bit more in the weapons department, because all she gets is the revolver and 2 types of pistols until you get to the post game to unlock the submachine gun. But I get the whole point is like this her part of the game was supposed to be more survival horror based, like 7, which it did do a pretty good job of. I will give it that. Was kind of weird to hear the zombies talking, but it is what it is. That first stalker enemy was quote unquote the girl was actually pretty terrifying the first encounter with her. So they did a good job of making it feel like 7. But unfortunately, like after the first third of the game, it swaps back to the Leon for the vast majority of it until you swap back to Grace briefly later on. Then Leon's campaign is more like Village, I guess. Which is fine. And I actually play both of them in first person because, again, I prefer first person, and most of the time, gunplay is just better in first person. So I didn't dislike that. It wasn't as jarring to swap between the two as if you just use default settings and played one in first and one in third. He's definitely a lot more action based, and for the most part, it's fine. Again, it does play like Village, but it really feels like the game was made by two different teams that did not communicate to each other at all. And the story, but either way, like gameplay is decent, and like there are parts of Grace's story that are legitimately terrifying, and I will give it props for that. My main issue is in the story department. It's terrible. Like I just, if this is supposed to be like the last game in the timeline, it really disappointing in that regard, because not only does it retcon a bunch of shit and make Spencer into like, ooh, I'm just trying to make things better. It's like, bullshit. We all heard him what he said in 5. And Zeno's character is just atrocious and pointless. It's like, you might as well just brought Wesker back if you're going to do that. And the fact that you don't even get to kill him. He just dies in a cutscene. It's just like, why? The final boss is just honestly kind of pathetic in general. Honestly, apart from that damn spider, most of the boss fights are just kind of crappy. I don't know. It's a decent game. It's just like the story just for being so disappointing and underwhelming. Like there's so many things that could have been answered on, and characters they could have brought back instead of Grace. It's just like, and the amount of retconning it does, just like this proves that what I've been saying before is like these modern Resident Evil writers have zero respect for the franchise. But as much as I hate the story, the game itself is fun. I will say I don't like the fact that they added like a raid mode-esque minigame to it when it should that should have been available at the start, especially of how stripped it is, because like, man, is that raid mode cut down. They even have like the same lines from the story playing while you're going through the same areas you've already been through. It's like, I'm glad it's not paid, but man, that's pathetic. I hope they do a better job with the DLC, since they already announced it's going to have story DLC than they have with the previous games, but that's just to be seen. But for now, I would say, high B. But yeah, that's Resident Evil for you. Like, most of the main games are solid, apart from 6. Spin-offs you're gonna have more trouble with. They're pretty hit or miss, but like most of those you don't have to play. Like, I would say probably the only ones that recommendable are maybe Outbreak, if you don't mind the fact that, it's not as fun single player. And Umbrella Chronicles, because it's just fun. But apart from that, if you just stick with the main games, you'll be fine. Most of them are pretty good, and just play the originals out at least once, please. Like, I get it. Like, they're a bit harder to get into because of the tank controls and fixed cameras, but they're objectively better than the remakes, especially in the story department. Like, Resident Evil 1, you can make a case for. Like, I know a lot of people prefer that one over the original, and I will accept that. And I will also admit, again, my nostalgia bitch mode is in full active of why they prefer that mode over remake, as well as the fact that I don't like the Crimson Head mechanic, which is, why did they bring that back in Requiem? But it is what it is, and again, just please play the originals at least once. But yeah, I fully recommend this series, regardless.